Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has raised its gaze towards the heavens, seeking answers, solace, and, often, the presence of superior beings. When the conversation turns towards the enigmatic realm of angels, the collective mind, almost instinctively, rushes towards the stereotypical image. Ethereal, majestic creatures, endowed with immense wings and snowy plumage, beings of supernatural beauty and colossal power. Popular imagination paints them, radiating celestial light. With flaming swords or golden harps, guardians or heralds of the divine, symbols of purity and strength descending from the heights to interact with the mortal world. This conception, rooted in centuries of sacred art, epic literature, and oral tradition, is the first snapshot that emerges in our consciousness. However, the vast and complex discipline dedicated to the deep study of these beings, angelology, reveals a much more nuanced and, at times, surprisingly different panorama from these preconceptions. It is a field of study that delves into the depths of ancient texts and millenary traditions, establishing patterns and unveiling a rich diversity in the nature and manifestation of these celestial emissaries. The primordial source, the cornerstone of almost all articulated knowledge about angels, is undoubtedly the biblical text. Before the meticulous compilation of the sacred scriptures, there certainly existed echoes, scattered murmurs in ancestral mythologies and folkloric tales of various cultures which alluded to celestial creatures or divine intermediaries. However, these vestiges are fragmentary, veiled by time and interpretation. It is in the Bible where the figure of the angel acquires a clearer definition, a specific function, and a recurrent presence throughout the millennia of narrated history. It is the inexhaustible repository from which the most substantial and detailed information about their hierarchy, their roles, and their forms of appearance is drawn. And here lies one of the most fascinating revelations of angelology. While, indeed, the sacred text describes, with vivid details, winged beings such as the imposing cherubim and the resplendent seraphim, entities whose magnificence and physical complexity defy human understanding. In a multitude of other narratives, the manifestation of angels takes a completely different form. It is not the winged figure descending from the heavens with a halo of glory that is presented, but rather an indistinguishably human appearance. They are perceived as men, often of extraordinary beauty, of noble and serene bearing, but in essence, with the configuration of an earthly being. The discernment of their true nature does not come from their ostentatious physical attributes, but from the revelation of their purpose or the transcendence of their message. They do not wear wings. They do not radiate light visible to the common eye. They are, on the surface, like any traveler or messenger. A paradigmatic example is found in the desolate plains of Sodom and Gomorrah, under the burning desert sun, where Lot, sitting at the city gate, was visited by two of these beings. In the narrative, they are described simply as two men, whose imposing presence and disturbing beauty caused commotion among the inhabitants. There was no mention of wings, nor of a divine glow, only the enigmatic authority that emanated from their figure. Similarly, in the most celebrated nativity story, when the angel of the Lord appears to Mary to announce the good news that would change the course of history, the scripture does not detail wings, nor a celestial crown. It is simply the angel Gabriel who presents himself, his voice resonating with an authority that goes beyond the physical, his message transforming destiny. And so, through countless pages of the Bible, we find descriptions where angels interact with humanity, often camouflaged in everyday life, devoid of the wings and fantastic iconography that popular culture has attributed to them. They are people, yes, but their essence is intrinsically supernatural, their purpose divinely orchestrated. It is precisely this duality, this capacity to manifest in such a veiled and, at the same time, so powerful way that invites us to consider a different perspective. Perhaps one of the most moving and interesting ways to approach the topic of angels, without fully diving into the academic depths of angelology, is to explore those real-life narratives where the intervention of a protective being, of an invisible guardian, seems to have been the only possible explanation. Stories that connect us with the possibility of the extraordinary in the ordinary. In the ancient pages of the book of Exodus, a text that has guided and comforted countless generations, a promise of astonishing clarity is found. A declaration of divine protection that resonates through the millennia. In chapter 23, verse 20, amidst the laws and commandments that would govern the life of the people of Israel on their journey through the desert, a phrase is read that encapsulates the very essence of this celestial guidance. Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to lead you to the place that I have prepared for you. Behave well in his presence and listen to his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not forgive your transgressions, for in him is my name. If you listen carefully to his voice and do what I say, your enemies will be my enemies, and your adversaries, my adversaries, because I am Jehovah your God. This is not a simple instruction, but a declaration of alliance, a guarantee of a vigilant presence, a divine protector assigned to a specific mission. It is a passage that unfolds like a beacon of hope and a solemn warning, revealing the intimate connection between human obedience and celestial protection. The mention that the angel carries the name of God in himself elevates his status, conferring upon him an authority and power that are not merely individual, but an extension of the divine will. He is not a simple messenger, but an executor of the omnipotent will, a guardian who will not hesitate to act firmly in the face of transgression, but whose main mission is to safeguard and guide. This verse is of extraordinary conceptual richness, for it not only speaks of the existence of a divine envoy, but also delves into the transcendent power of protection. The phrase, to guard you on the way, and to lead you to the place that I have prepared for you, resonates with a particular depth, suggesting guidance not only physical, but also spiritual, a predetermined destiny, and an invisible hand that guides every step. It is this promise of custody in the journey of life, of a direction towards a greater purpose, that powerfully attracted us to explore those testimonies where this protective intervention manifested undeniably. Stories that, by their very nature, force us to question the limits of what we consider possible, and to open ourselves to the possibility that the invisible is not always inactive. Allow me, then, to take you to a not-so-distant past, to the eve of a new millennium, where the destiny of a young woman was about to cross paths with an inexplicable protection. It was the year 2001, 2 decades ago, a time of changes and promises on the threshold of the new century. At that time, a young and brilliant medical student, whom we will call Erica, was at the pinnacle of her academic training. She had successfully overcome the rigors of the career, accumulating knowledge and skills that she would soon put to the test in the field. Now, with her degree almost in hand, she was preparing for the next crucial stage, the medical internship. This period of intensive practice would require her to move to some remote place, far from the university metropolis, to apply everything she had learned in school, facing the raw reality of medicine. Her classmates, the cohort with whom she had shared study nights and moments of camaraderie, would also disperse, each one towards their own destiny, their own challenges. It was the end of an era, and for a long time, familiar faces would become distant, friendly voices, mere echoes of the past. Aware of this imminent separation, the group decided to organize a last celebration, a temporary farewell to carefree youth, a toast to the diverging paths. The chosen setting for this epilogue of their student stage was a place of breathtaking natural beauty. We are in Ecuador, a nation of exuberant landscapes and astonishing contrasts. The choice fell on an idyllic coastal beach, a paradise of golden sand and turquoise waters. Located about 2 hours from the bustling city, the trip required a car, and fortunately, one of the friends was the proud owner of one. The festive caravan was formed with 5 or 6 companions, all young, full of life, and with the effervescent spirit that characterizes those who are about to embark on a new adventure. The atmosphere vibrated with the promise of a memorable pachanga party, an explosion of joy before the imminent seriousness of their future careers. The sun, radiant and generous, bathed the landscape. The salty air caressed their faces, and the warm sand under their feet was an invitation to limitless enjoyment. Finally, the entourage arrived at its destination. The beach stretched before them, a brilliant canvas under the deep blue sky. The sun rose majestically at the zenith, tinting the horizon with golden and silver glints over the immensity of the Pacific Ocean. The sea breeze, laden with the salty aroma of the sea and the faint perfume of coastal vegetation, danced around them, bringing refreshing relief to the equatorial heat. The water, of crystalline transparency and a deliciously warm temperature, invited them to immerse themselves in its salty embrace. It was a postcard day, a perfect picture of carefree abandon. And, as often happens in such scenarios of youthful euphoria and liberation, the desire for something more refreshing than crystal-clear water soon made its appearance. A cold beer seemed irresistible, and then another, its white foam contrasting with the blue of the sky. And then one more, the soft bitterness mixing with the growing euphoria. Laughter grew louder. Voices rose in improvised songs that broke the serenity of the beach. Young bodies ran aimlessly along the shore, their ephemeral footprints erased by the tide. The joy was palpable, a whirlwind of emotions and laughter, watered by the freely flowing alcohol, relaxing inhibitions, and magnifying the feeling of freedom. At some point in this bacchanal, a friend who had not managed to join the initial trip appeared, having arrived by his own means. His arrival added more fuel to the bonfire of the celebration, and the party, far from diminishing, continued with renewed vigor, under the inexorable advance of the sun on its journey towards sunset. However, the imminent arrival of evening brought with it a subtle shadow over the joviality. The first orange and violet tones began to paint the sky, announcing twilight. Amidst the revelry, it became evident that the young owner of the car, responsible for driving back, had generously succumbed to the liquid pleasures of the celebration. Her movements were less coordinated, her speech more slurred, her eyes glassy. Despite her state, the tenacity of alcohol, or perhaps a distorted sense of responsibility, led her to flatly refuse to give up the wheel. It was her car, and no one else would drive it. Her companions, in turn, were also not in optimal condition to make a sensible decision or to take control. Everyone's faculties were seriously compromised by excessive intake. Despite the latent concerns, most of those present, enveloped in the fog of alcohol and fatigue, agreed to return with her. 5 people, including Erica, the young medical student and future witness to the unheard of, prepared to board the vehicle. Erica, with a marked preference for the window seat. Her desire to observe the exterior landscape and avoid the claustrophobia of the central seat positioned herself at the edge of the back seat, seeking her usual space, anticipating the comfort of the breeze on her face and the view of the road. It was then, at that precise instant of apparent stability, when the crucial detail of this story manifested itself. That friend who had arrived later, the last to join the celebration and whose sobriety was not much better than the rest, burst onto the scene with a hurried run. With a sudden movement, he opened the car door and, without a word, without a shred of consideration, neither for Erica's space nor her comfort, he pushed her forcefully towards the center of the seat. The impact was sudden, unexpected, and left her trapped, uncomfortable, disoriented, squeezed between the seat and another companion. The intruder settled into the spot Erica so desired, closed the door with a dry thud, sealing her immediate fate, and the vehicle, with a roar of the engine, started. A grave error, a fatal error of collective judgment, orchestrated by unconsciousness. 10 minutes. Barely 10 minutes of travel, under the growing twilight of dusk. The driver, whose intoxication was already an undeniable fact, approached a curve with reckless temerity, a total lack of control that Ecuadorians would describe with the crude and graphic phrase, "She ate the curve. She took the curve too fast, wide." The car, unable to follow the asphalt's trajectory, veered violently, leaving the road and entering the treacherous edge of the path. What followed was a dizzying descent, a macabre dance of metal and flesh in the jaws of a small ravine, or rather, a gully about 12 to 15 meters deep. It was not an abyss, but the force of the fall and the vehicle's inertia were deadly. The car, barely touching the edge, began its horrible trajectory, rolling over once, then again, and again, transforming into an uncontrollable mass of twisted metal. Inside, the occupants were mercilessly thrown from side to side, hitting against the roof, the doors, and each other, in an absolute chaos of uncontrolled bodies. None were wearing seatbelts, a negligence that would seal the fate of some. Amidst the tumult, one of the young men was violently ejected from the vehicle, his fragile body thrown into the air before being mercilessly crushed by the mass of steel that followed him. His life ended at that very instant, his scream muffled by the roar of the impact. The others continued rolling, in a hell of turns and blows, until, finally, the car, exhausted from its deadly dance, stopped abruptly, silent and devastated, like a wounded beast at the bottom of the gully. Erica, the main witness to this tragedy and survivor of a miracle, found herself in an unnatural position, her body oppressed, aching, amidst the tangle of metal and inert bodies. A strange sensation invaded her, a mixture of bewilderment and a sharp pain that tore at her face. She felt an unusual heat, a sticky burning that soaked her skin. Being a medical student, the acrid, metallic smell of blood was familiar to her, and now, that stench permeated the air around her, mixing with the hot steam and engine fluids, which seeped and bathed her. Panic, cold and paralyzing, began to rise in her throat. She didn't know how much time had passed, whether she had lost consciousness from the blows, or if a dense fog of confusion had invaded her. What was undeniable was the sensation that her eye had disappeared, that her face was irremediably disfigured. Amidst this darkness and pain, she felt a slight movement, a glimmer of possibility. The doors were irrevocably jammed, twisted into sheets of metal, but one of the windows, miraculously, offered an escape route. With superhuman effort, she managed to slide through the opening, emerging from the metallic hell into the starry night. Once outside, under the silent vault of the sky, time became distorted. At some point, the darkness was broken by flashing lights, people's shouts, the providential arrival of rescuers. The scene became a blur of frantic activity, and Erica, one of the survivors, was rushed to the hospital. The price of that pachanga party was horrendous, a tragic bill paid with human lives and shattered bodies. Two young people, Erica's companions, lay lifeless, crushed under the remains of the car, their dreams cut short in an instant. The driver, whose irresponsibility at the wheel had unleashed the catastrophe, suffered multiple fractures in her legs and ribs, a broken body. But her life, at least, had been saved, and Erica, the central witness to the events, had received a devastating blow to the face, a brutal aggression that left her disfigured, practically without an eye, with a massive loss of blood that soaked her clothes. Her condition was critical. She was admitted to intensive care, undergoing immediate surgical intervention to contain the hemorrhage and repair the most urgent damage. However, to the astonishment of the doctors and Erica herself, subsequent examinations revealed an almost incomprehensible truth. Despite the very severe blows to her face, in the rest of her body there were no serious internal injuries, nor fractures that threatened her life or mobility. Some reconstructive surgeries later, Erica's face was restored with surprising medical skill, returning her almost original appearance. She was, physically, as good as new. But there is a detail, an intimate experience that Erica rarely shares, something she keeps as a sacred treasure deep within her being. An event that took place at the very instant the car veered off the road and began its fatal descent. In that instant of pure terror, when the outside world became a blur of twisted metal and flying dirt, Erica experienced a sensation that defies all logic and explanation. As the car plunged towards the abyss, she felt an undeniable presence, arms, of incomprehensibly powerful strength, held her with a firmness that anchored her body to the seat, preventing any movement, protecting her from the chaos. Simultaneously, a voice, clear, resonant, and of absolute calm, whispered in her ear, or perhaps directly in her mind, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to you." Immediately afterwards, confusion took over everything. Incessant turns, violent blows, the roar of metal. The companion traveling beside her, the fatal victim who was ejected from the car, could not have been the one who held her. His body was no longer in the vehicle to protect her, but was thrown towards his final destiny. The other person, on the other side, had also perished in the impact, unable to offer any kind of comfort or protection. So, who was it that embraced her with such strength? Who uttered those words of comfort? Erica does not remember the voice as a distant echo or a vague hallucination, but as an intensely close, almost intimate auditory presence. It was strange, but at the same time, it possessed a disconcerting familiarity, as if she had known it all her life, and, at the same time, had never heard it. She could not identify it with the voice of any deceased relative. In that period of her life, she had not experienced any significant loss, nor did she recognize it as the voice of any of the survivors present. It was a warm voice, yes, but its warmth was intertwined with an unbreakable strength, a palpable authority, powerful like the voice of a storm that, paradoxically, promises calm. When the medical treatments were concluding, and her recovery was advancing by leaps and bounds, the first concern Erica shared with her treating physician was her incomprehension of her own luck. She couldn't understand how, given the magnitude of the tragedy and the severity of the injuries suffered by her companions, she had emerged from that metallic hell with a single, serious facial injury. The internal damages suffered by the others were devastating, their bodies shattered by the violence of the impact. How was it possible that she, in the same vehicle, at the same moment of chaos, presented only a facial injury and no other permanent internal injury? But what most astonished both the rescuers who extracted her from the car wreckage and the doctors who treated her at the hospital was a crucial observation. Erica had not moved from her spot. Amidst that frenzy of turns and blows, her body had remained strangely anchored. It seemed as if she had been held to her seat by an invisible and unbreakable force. What had hit her face, what had caused the devastation to her face, was probably a fragment of the vehicle's roof that collapsed with the force of the impact, a localized, almost surgical damage, in contrast to the generalized chaos that surrounded her. This detail reinforced the disbelief at her survival. Erica, finally, left the aseptic and somber hospital environment, returning to the sunlight and the promise of a renewed life. With unwavering determination, she launched herself into professional life, recovering the time that tragedy had stolen from her. The medical profession is, in itself, a vocation of inestimable service, and Erica became an important figure in her field, her personal story imbued with formidable resilience. Her life moved forward, weaving new experiences, new joys, and new challenges. However, in the most intimate corner of her memory, that voice persisted. Strong, powerful, clear, like the echo of a distant storm that, in its moment of greatest fury, had whispered to her, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to you." She didn't usually share this experience with anyone, for fear of being judged, of being labeled naive or crazy. She kept it as a sacred secret, irrefutable proof of the inexplicable. But one day, while in the apparent monotony of her living room, watching television, destiny prepared a revelation that would change everything. And it is that, some time before, the world had been shaken by the news of an air accident of catastrophic proportions. Who could forget the tragedy of the flight carrying the Chapecoense soccer team, Lamia Flight number 2933, whose fateful destiny led it to crash against a mountain near Medellin, Colombia. It was an event that captured global attention, not only for the loss of lives, but for the nature of the passengers, A soccer team heading to play a transcendental match, the culmination of their dreams. The investigation revealed a chain of negligences, both from ground personnel and flight crew, that culminated in the devastating collision. 70-something people lost their lives in the impact. The vast majority of the players, coaching staff, and pilots. However, amidst the desolation, a miracle. There were 6 survivors. Of those 6, one story in particular stood out for its strangeness and its profound similarity to Erica's experience. It was about the flight attendant, the air hostess, a young woman whose name, Jimena Suarez Otterberg, would resonate in the memory of many. Jimena managed to survive in a way that could only be described as providential, emerging from among a pile of bodies and metallic remains. In a section of the plane that was completely destroyed, she was alive. With injuries? Yes, but miraculously, in a short time, she was back on her feet, testifying about the horror and the miracle. It was in that television interview, which captured Erica's attention in her living room, where the connection became undeniable. Jimena Suarez's words, uttered with a conviction that transcended trauma, chilled Erica's blood and ignited a light of recognition. Jimena affirmed that, at the precise instant the plane was plunging towards the inevitable crash, she felt those same arms that embraced her with unheard-of strength, holding her firmly, while a voice resonated within her. A voice with the power of a storm, but with the softness of a promise. Everything will be all right. Jimena Suarez has maintained, and even today, with the passing of years, continues to affirm that in that moment of imminent disaster, she experienced the unmistakable presence of a powerful, protective force that safeguarded her from death. The similarity was chilling, a perfect echo of Erica's own experience. And it is then, with a mind overflowing with astonishment and a heart full of new understanding, when our memory immediately refers us to the ancient text of Exodus, to the divine promise of unconditional protection. Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to lead you to the place that I have prepared for you. In what other way, on the vast canvas of reason and logic, could you, reader or viewer, explain such coincidences, such interventions that defy the laws of probability and physics? It is an ancestral dilemma that confronts humanity. For those who choose to believe, the evidence, though intangible, is more than enough to nourish faith. The narratives of the inexplicable are integrated into their worldview as confirmations of a higher order. However, for those who cling to disbelief, no reason, no matter how eloquent or moving, will be valid. The skeptical mind will always seek the rational explanation, cognitive bias, hallucination, improbable coincidence, refusing to cross the threshold of the miraculous. But these stories invite us to transcend the dichotomy. They make us think that, sometimes, angels are not mere ethereal beings, luminous spirits floating in the celestial ether, but that their manifestation can be of a much closer, more earthly nature, and, therefore, more moving. It seems that, at times, this angel that the Lord has promised to send us, the guardian who walks before us, could be someone who once inhabited this plane, who occupied a mortal body, who lived, loved, and departed. And what if these souls are allowed an extension of their earthly existence, a brief return to the world of the living, to fulfill a sacred function, to be that protective angel in moments of extreme need? The following story, with its sweetness and mystery, seems to point precisely to this possibility. Listen carefully to the following story, which transports us to the Iberian Peninsula, to green and rainy Galicia, in the beautiful city of La Coruña, Spain. In the heart of this Atlantic city, under the often gray sky and the sea breezes that sweep the coast, lived a little girl named Tere. She was barely 3 years old, an age when the world is discovered with eyes of wonder and imagination knows no bounds. Tere was the only daughter in the family, and, in the context of many families of the time, the only girl in a wide circle of relatives. This made her, to some extent, a somewhat solitary little girl. Her inner world, rich and complex, often inhabited by herself. Her parents, like so many others in the maelstrom of modern life, worked hard, their days marked by hustle and constant coming and going. Tara spent long hours alone at home, the quietness of the home only broken by the murmur of her own games. Only when she visited her grandmother's house, the atmosphere transformed, filled with the laughter and shouts of other children. The cousins who gathered, creating a symphony of joy and companionship. But in her own house in La Coruña, loneliness was her usual companion. They lived in an old building, mostly inhabited by elderly people, whose lives unfolded at a slower pace. Just below, a few meters from the building's door, and separated by a small fence. Not a large impenetrable wall but a modest railing, the road stretched out. A bustling artery where cars roared at high speed, heavy trucks rumbled, and imposing buses paraded incessantly. For a 3-year-old girl, whose innate curiosity would prompt her to retrieve a stray ball, that was a threshold of danger, an easy victim for the relentless speed of traffic. Very soon, Tara's loneliness found relief, or at least that's how her parents initially perceived it. The little girl began to talk with an imaginary friend. Yes, yes, yes. Like so many children in their developmental stage, her fertile mind created an invisible companion. Any parent's first reaction, in the logic of parenting, would be to attribute it to rich, childish fantasy, to hours spent in front of television cartoons, or to the undeniable loneliness the girl sometimes experienced. Don't worry, they would tell themselves, convinced it was a normal phase, a creative outlet. Allow me to take you a little beyond this first impression. Terry's imaginary friend had a most common name, a name that evoked neither fantasy nor grandeur. She was called Mari. It could have been any exotic or invented name, but it was simply Mari. And Terry, with the conviction and naturalness characteristic of her age, talked with her incessantly. When an adult, whether her mother, father, or a neighbor, was nearby, they could hear Tara engrossed in her unilateral conversations. They heard her crystalline laughter echo in the patio, the way she played, whispering and gesturing towards an invisible point. They also observed moments when the ball she was playing with escaped, rolling dangerously towards the noisy street. And Tara, with the irrepressible impulse of childhood, ran after it. But, right at the threshold of danger, something stopped her. She stopped dead, as if an invisible hand held her back and patiently waited for an adult to retrieve her toy, an unusual precaution for a child her age. Other times, when a childish whim or a fleeting frustration plunged her into a bad mood characteristic of 3 or 4-year-olds, and she was about to talk back to her mother, suddenly her expression changed. A smile appeared on her face, and with surprising placidity, she said that Mari had just told her to obey, to behave well, transforming her rebelliousness into docility. Nights also revealed a singularity. Even without her mommy asking her to sit on her little bed and put her little hands together to say her prayers, like in cartoons, Tara did it on her own initiative. And what is more surprising, she repeated a prayer that no one in her family had taught her. Her mother sometimes listened to her, with a mixture of astonishment and tenderness. Her heart moved to see her cute little girl, with her little hands joined, babbling a, "My Lord, I don't know how much," and, recurrently, a love of the guard. No one had stopped to seriously reflect on where that little girl got those phrases, that devotion. But Mari's presence was not limited to the home. In the car, on family trips, Mari also accompanied them. Such was Tara's conviction that, when they told her, "You sit here," she would reply, "And where does Mari go?" And they would leave an empty space on the seat, so Mari could sit comfortably, an invisible but undeniable space. But Mari's manifestations did not end there. At home, at meal times, Ter would run with innocent haste to drag a small chair, placing it next to the table for Mari to sit with them. And if any unsuspecting family member tried to occupy that empty seat, Ter would stop them with a sweet vehemence, explaining that the spot was already taken because Mari is there. The family, though with a mixture of amusement and resignation, respected this ritual. The fact is that one day, Terry's mother, engrossed in reading a magazine, came across a fascinating article. The topic, Imaginary Friends in Childhood. The text explained how these fantastic figures served as a kind of escape for children's loneliness, a creative way to face their own frustrations, a crucial exercise to rehearse their future coexistence in the real world. It was, according to the article, a very important psychological mechanism. I have a concern at 3 or 4 years old. I want to express it, and I play this game of how I solve it. What do you think? What don't you think? The mother, moved by the coincidence and the apparent explanation, was delighted to read these lines, believing she had found the key to understanding her daughter's inner world. A few days later, the house was filled with the cheerful visit of the grandmother. During the conversation, the topic of Mari, as expected, came up again. Mari here, Mari there. The girl talked incessantly about her invisible friend. At one point, the girl stopped, waiting. "And why are you waiting?" asked the mother, curious. "It's just that Mari was late," Ter replied naturally. The mother, with the conviction the magazine had given her, told the grandmother about her discovery regarding imaginary friends and their psychological function. The grandmother, moved by a deeper curiosity, approached the girl and, with a soft and playful voice, asked her, "Well, let's see. And this girl, your friend Mari, what is she like?" 10. At that instant, Terry, with all the transparency and innocence of a 3 or 4-year-old girl, turned to her grandmother and, with a look of obviousness, said, "What do you mean? She's not a girl." An expectant silence fell over the room. A look of suspicion, of barely disguised astonishment, passed between the mother and grandmother. They looked at each other, an implicit question floating in the air. "Well, and what is she then?" inquired the grandmother, her voice laden with an expectation that was no longer merely playful. The mother, clinging to the rationalist explanation, to her magazine reading, imagined that Mari must have been some figure Tara had taken from television images, perhaps a character from stories or cartoons. That's why, when the grandmother asked with a more serious tone, "Well, and if she's not a girl, then what is she?" Tara's answer came with the same conviction. "She's a woman." "What do you mean, a woman?" the grandmother insisted, a chill beginning to run down her spine. Yes, she's already a grown person," the girl confirmed. "Well, and what is she like?" The grandmother tried to get details. Describing an adult is a complex task for a small child's mind. If you ask a 3 or 4-year-old child to describe an adult, you are likely to encounter vague answers or ones focused on unconventional details. The grandmother then tried to guide her with more specific questions. "Well, does she have black hair? Does she have white hair?" Ter's answer was unexpected, forceful. "No, she has red hair." The surprise was palpable in the adults. "Red?" they murmured, the rarity of the description colliding with their expectations. "And her name is Mari," the girl affirmed, reaffirming her reality. Yes, and she gives me a lot of advice, and also takes care of me. When my ball rolls away, she doesn't let me go over there, and sometimes she tells me, 'Obey your mom and eat that.' Even if I don't want to, I have to eat it because Mari is Mari." The last phrase, uttered with an unbreakable childish authority, resonated in the room. Of course, a nervous smile began to form on the lips of more than one of those present. A smile that mixed humor with a growing uneasiness. Mari was the great-grandmother, and you will think, dear listener, What a complicated coincidence. Or, what a common name. Tara's great-grandmother was Maria del Carmen, a woman everyone in the family affectionately knew as Mari. She had passed away just 3 months before Tara was born, an almost magical span of time. Great-grandmother Mari, in her last days, had been exultant at the news of the arrival of a little girl, of a new baby in the family. It was the year 1986, and little Tara would be the first great-granddaughter to be born, filling Mari's last moments with joy and hope. The elderly woman constantly spoke of the excitement she felt to see her, to hold her, to rock her in her arms. But perhaps the most extraordinary detail, the one that sealed disbelief and opened the door to the inexplicable, was the description of her hair. Mari, the great-grandmother, had been a redhead. Very, very red-haired. When she reached old age, her hair had turned white, a silver halo. But in her years of fullness, in the best moment of her life, when she felt best, her mane was a vibrant red, just as the girl described it. And what if this Mari was not just an imaginary figure, product of childish loneliness, but a guardian angel, a being of light who, although no longer present on the physical plane, received permission to accompany and protect? We believe that angels, by definition, should be little angels with fluttering wings, cherubs with rosy cheeks and tiny harps. But what if that guardian angel, that protector granted to us from heaven, is actually someone as close as the grandmother, like Mari, who departed from this physical world, but who is granted the grace and privilege to stay a little longer, to remain close, to care with a love that transcends death, to watch every step, to watch over the path, to be that loving presence that the Lord has placed before you on your journey, so that you arrive, safe and sound, at the place He has prepared for you. What do you think of this profound possibility? It is an idea that transforms the concept of life after death and the nature of divine protection. Now, do you want me to tell you another story? One that plunges us into the heart of intrigue and danger? Wait a second. We are going to keep the protagonist's name under a strict veil of anonymity. This is about a person who is still active, holding a high-level position within law enforcement, a role that demands discretion and, therefore, it is imperative to zealously safeguard his name and the prestige he has earned with years of service. Suffice it to say that we are in the vast and complex geography of Argentina, a country of contrasts and passions. Our protagonist, whom we will call Jose, is a chief officer, a man with an impressive trajectory, with more than 30 years dedicated to service in the security force. His experience has led him to the most difficult cases, to the darkest corners of the criminal mind, to the rarest and most disconcerting investigations. For decades, he has belonged to various branches of the Argentine police forces. His face has seen the harshness of organized crime, the complexity of drug trafficking, and also the shadows of unusual investigations. Sects, yes. Although it may seem incredible, these phenomena are also investigated, because atrocious crimes are often incubated within them. Cold cases, unsolved files, mysteries that defy logic, in all of them, he has left his mark. His name, now that he is a mature, venerable man, still resonates with the authority and respect he has garnered. He entered the force very young, with the energy of youth, and now, more than 30 years later, he is still active, holding one of the highest and most respected positions within the institution. However, in the vast library of his memories, there is an event that remains with astonishing clarity, an experience lived by him and his partner in that distant 1992, which defied all rational explanations. They were a couple of young officers back then, yes, but they did not lack experience or knowledge. Their youth went hand in hand with a keen perception forged in the streets. They were detectives, men accustomed to the relentless vigil of the night, to the solitude of hours spent sitting inside a car, observing with methodical patience the subtle movement of a criminal gang. They were experts in the hunt, in silent waiting, in the unbreakable patience of waiting for hours in the darkness, in the deep stillness of the night, awaiting an elusive criminal. They were seasoned in the tricks the mind sometimes plays when fatigue accumulates, when vigilance extends beyond human limits, and sleep begins to cloud perception. Accustomed to not being deceived by shadows or optical illusions, to always remain calm under pressure, but with a hand always near the weapon, a faithful steel companion that protected them from all evil. That was the essence of Jose. A man of law, a guardian in the darkness. It was winter, and the intense cold of the Argentine night seeped through the cracks. Jose and his partner were preparing to conduct a special investigation, a delicate and high-risk task. A homicide had occurred, a case that fell directly under their jurisdiction, and a vital lead had emerged, an informant. But this informant was not a casual witness, nor a small-time snitch. He was a mafioso, a man involved in the networks of organized crime, known for his extreme dangerousness and unpredictability. He had summoned them at midnight to a place known only as the casino. It was not a gambling establishment, but a secluded area of the city, a desolate corner where, at certain hours of the night, human presence was nil, a canvas of solitude and abandonment. They were to go there, in the darkness, to interview this enigmatic individual, hoping to obtain a crucial lead, a thread that would lead them to the killer and allow them to solve the atrocious crime they had on their hands. The mission was inherently risky. They were entering an area of the city of Paraná known for the exponential growth of crime, a nest of gangs and conflicts, a place where the law often felt like a faint shadow. According to the plan, José would pick up his partner to go together to that clandestine meeting. Obviously, any movement by a law enforcement officer, especially at midnight, in a hostile environment, could be a trigger. Even more so if they were law-abiding people, upright men operating in the shadows of illegality. Their lives, in their very profession, were always in precarious balance. In addition to everything, the friend, that partner of José, lived in a sector of the city that was quite dangerous in itself. A neighborhood with a notoriously high crime rate, where surveillance was constant and distrust commonplace. The street where this partner resided was, moreover, very peculiar in its urban configuration. The avenue, the flow of cars, ran a little below the level of the houses, while some slopes ascended gently towards the dwellings, which stood in an elevated position. His partner had deliberately chosen this strategic location, as from there, the entire street could be perfectly overlooked. There was no way to be surprised, as the elevation of his house gave them an invaluable tactical advantage. However, this same topography presented a critical drawback for José. When he arrived to pick up his partner, he found himself in an extremely compromised position. Towards the front, the road was closed, with no possibility of escape, flanked by tightly packed houses and no gaps. Towards the back, the situation was identical, a dead end. But this configuration also had its positive side. It allowed a perfect view through the rear-view mirrors, detecting any approach from the rear and a clear view to the front. It was a place José knew well, its depths and its dangers. That winter night, José arrived some time before the agreed hour, a usual practice in his methodical profession. His intention was to take the pulse of the place, calmly assess the surroundings, mentally plan the interview, and ensure there were no hidden risks or unexpected ambushes. When he arrived at the exact spot in front of his partner's house, he stopped the vehicle and observed his colleague's silhouette at the top. The house, built on the hillside, had a kind of railing from where his partner observed him. José greeted him with a discreet nod. The friend, his loyal police partner, returned the greeting and turned around, beginning to descend some stone stairs that led to a metal door, the main access to the street. José, while observing the sequence with the attention of a hawk, did not fail to glance around, an instinctive movement, a second nature in every police officer. If you have ever had the opportunity to be in the presence of an agent, a detective, or an investigator, you will know that they never stop observing, analyzing, being present in the environment. And this was a critical point. a moment of vulnerability. With the weapon near his hand, Jose was aware of the high risk involved in his partner's descent. Anything could happen. The friend approached the street, his steps echoing in the stillness of the winter night. At that instant, a voice, a feminine voice, soft, sweet as a whisper, but with an unmistakable clarity, broke the silence. "Good evening," she said. Jose immediately turned around, his eyes scanning the rearview mirrors, checking the perimeter with the speed of a feline. But no, there was no one else. Only a girl. A young woman, dressed completely in white, with a tight sweater and fitted jeans, also white. Her face, of an almost unreal pallor, was framed by beautiful and pleasant eyes, which radiated a strange serenity. A delicate smile formed on her lips. Her hair, short and with a peculiar fringe, was of an unusual, almost childish cut, and she insisted, with that kind voice, on repeating, "Good evening." Officer Jose, despite the bewilderment, replied with a "Good evening," maintaining his precautions, his hand still near the weapon. His partner, the other police officer, was coming down the last stairs, closing the gate of his house's staircase, the door that gave access to the street. He also observed the scene, the appearance of that enigmatic figure. The girl, with astonishing calm, addressed them. "Listen, I want to ask you a favor. You see, I'm going to a neighborhood that's up here, very close, but there, further ahead, there's a huge dog, and it's terribly fierce, and I can't pass. I'm very scared, and I know it's a lot to ask, but do you think you could take me closer to my friend's house, where I have to go, because I'm afraid of that dog?" Her voice was pleading, convincing, and the story, though peculiar, sounded plausible enough in that neighborhood. Before they could react or debate, the girl had already passed in front of the car, heading towards the passenger door, and, coincidentally, at the exact moment his partner arrived next to the vehicle, the friend opened the door of the two-seater car, moved the front seat, and the young woman slid into the back, occupying the back seat. The two police officers got in, closed the doors, and the first thing Jose, with his protective instinct and sense of duty, told the girl was, "Listen, you are lucky, but don't do this again. We are police officers, you are safe, don't worry. But don't get into a car with people you don't know again. It's the silliest thing you could have done. If we were criminals, you would be lost." With the paternal reprimand, Jose explained the dangers of the world, started the car, and began to drive. The girl, for a moment, seemed not very sure of the directions. "It's this way, but then, it's that way. And then, suddenly you turn around here." Her instructions were hesitant, almost indecisive. The journey became longer than expected, a succession of turns and detours, until, finally, they reached a point where the girl told them with a firm voice, "Stop the car. I'll get off here." When the officers looked around, the desolation was palpable. They were in a solitary spot, the darkness of the night only broken by a couple of distant streetlights casting a ghostly light. On one side, a large, impenetrable wall. On the other, a similar structure, also closed. Not a single house was seen, nor any sign of human life. It was a place in the middle of nowhere, inhospitable and desolate. Throughout the journey, Jose had continued his scolding, his voice severe but with a nuance of genuine concern, explaining to the girl the risks of her behavior. He watched her fixedly through the rear-view mirror. The girl, in turn, looked him directly in the eyes, and from time to time, she would give a very slight, almost imperceptible smile. She was a girl with incredibly fine features, blonde hair, her skin of an almost translucent whiteness. Her smile was calm, serene, despite being alone at midnight with two strangers, two men of the law. The girl seemed to have everything under control, an impressive calm that emanated from her figure, and that smile, as charming as it was enigmatic. When they arrived at the spot indicated by the young woman, That inhospitable place, in the middle of the darkness. She reiterated, "I'll get off here." Jose's partner, with the routine of a police officer who has learned not to question the inexplicable, opened the passenger door and lifted the seat so the girl could get out of the back. At that instant, before sliding out of the car, the girl looked fixedly at Jose, their eyes meeting in the rearview mirror, and told him with an unsettling sweetness, "Take good care of yourself." Immediately afterwards, she got out of the vehicle, took 2 steps on the cold earth of the night, and disappeared. When Jose leaned over to move the gear lever and looked towards where the girl should be, there was no one. His partner, still crouched, put his head back into the compartment and asked, his voice laden with astonishment and a touch of terror, "Where did she go?" Both police officers, men of science and logic, looked at each other, then in all directions, with flashlights in hand. There was no one. There was no trace. Jose got out of the car. His partner followed him, and with flashlights in hand, they began to check every corner, every shadow. There was no way she could have gone. The terrain was open, without shelters, without hiding places. It was impossible for her to disappear like that. A strange cold, not that of winter, invaded them, a chill that had nothing to do with body temperature. What on earth had just happened to them? They looked once more towards the point of disappearance, until the partner, with a tense voice, said, "You know what? Let's go. This is not natural. This is not from here. What happened was not of this world. This is very strange." They got into the car, closed the doors, the engine roared again, and Jose kept looking everywhere, with the vague hope of finding some explanation, some clue. But there was nothing. The street, straight and deserted, stretched endlessly, and the girl had vanished in less than 2 seconds, as if she had never existed. The instant Jose shifted gears, and his gaze went to the back seat, the young woman had disappeared. The urgency to find an explanation, to know who she was, to make sense of the incomprehensible, urged them to keep searching. But the reality was undeniable. The angelic figure had vanished. With their minds still processing what they had experienced, they continued their way to the meeting point. When they finally arrived at the supposed casino, the secluded place where they were to meet the mafioso informant, there was no one. They had been lost for many minutes. They didn't know exactly how long. The notion of time had been distorted, their internal clock, altered by the strangeness of the events. But the approximate calculation indicated that more than an hour had passed between the detour for the girl, the fruitless search, and the arrival at the meeting point. The informant had left. Despite the strange experience and the lost time, the detectives continued with their work, their unwavering professionalism. A couple of days later, persistence paid off. They managed to arrest the subject involved in the homicide, and during the interrogation, the criminal's first statement chilled their blood and confirmed what their instincts and the strange apparition had already suggested to them. He told them they had been incredibly lucky. The interview they were going to have that night was, by no means, a meeting to obtain information. It was an ambush. They were waiting to kill them in cold blood. That was the only objective. They weren't going to reveal any clues. They were going to ambush them, murder them, and make them disappear. For some inexplicable reason, this girl of angelic appearance, with a sweet voice but undeniable authority, had appeared at the exact moment, the perfect intervention that had diverted them from the path of death. Of course, when Jose, still assimilating the magnitude of the event, asked his friend and coworker, "Hey, had you seen her before?" the answer was a resounding no. "Where did she come from?" Jose insisted. "I don't know," replied the partner, his voice still tinged with astonishment. Jose's partner was emphatic in his testimony. From the strategic point where he was leaning on the railing of his house, with a view that covered at least 300 meters of the street, he could have detected the approach of anyone, from any direction. And he didn't see her approach from anywhere. She simply appeared. And, when she got out of the car, she disappeared without a trace. But, besides this, in all the years this man had lived in that place, in that neighborhood, he knew inch by inch a police officer. After all, must know every inhabitant of his sector, he had never seen that girl. She was a complete stranger, an anomaly in a familiar environment. The promise of Exodus resonated with thunderous clarity in their minds. Your enemies will be my enemies, and I will protect you. A protection manifested in the most unexpected way, the intervention of the divine in the most mundane and dangerous of situations. Do you want me to tell you another story, one that speaks to us of the fragility of life and the unbreakable strength of faith? Good. This one is narrated by Fernanda, a woman whose family was touched by a miracle. One day, Fernanda faced a serious problem, a health crisis that threatened her mother's life. The lady suffered from severe scoliosis, a painful and progressive deviation of the spinal column. Furthermore, her medical history was complex and worrying. Some time ago, she had suffered a heart attack that had left her heart severely damaged, a scar on the muscle that beat with palpable fragility. The health problems, far from subsiding, continued their inexorable advance. Fernanda's mother was admitted to a hospital, where the diagnosis was conclusive and terrifying. She needed an emergency operation. The alternative, the terrible consequence of not intervening, was quadriplegia, a life of immobility and dependence. The decision was obvious, though heartbreaking. Of course, they agreed to proceed with the surgery. The hope of a better life, though uncertain, was preferable to the fate of paralysis. However, the universe, in its infinite complexity, had other plans. One of Fernanda's uncles, her mother's brother, and a respected military doctor, received an unusual message in a dream. In the vivid canvas of his subconscious, his deceased grandmother appeared to him. The maternal figure, with the wisdom that only experience and life after life can confer, transmitted a clear and urgent message. She strongly recommended that he take charge of everything, that he not leave his sister in that hospital, because they are going to kill her there. The warning was resounding, terrifying. She indicated that he should take her to another place, to a specific place that he, due to his condition as a doctor, would know how to identify. The next day, the dream did not vanish with the morning light. It was so real, so vivid and persistent, that the uncle acted accordingly, with the urgency and gravity that the warning demanded. And indeed, upon reviewing the treatment his sister was receiving in the first hospital, the medical evaluation confirmed that it was not ideal, that there were deficiencies and risks that the dream had anticipated. They transferred Fernanda's mother to the military hospital, a place where, thanks to the family connection and the uncle's influence, she was received with the speed her case demanded. There, the situation revealed itself as one of extreme urgency. With the added complexity of her serious heart problem, the risk of any surgical intervention skyrocketed. The doctor who received them, a man of experience and seriousness, spoke to them with a serenity that, paradoxically, amplified the gravity of the situation, but with an inescapable truth. The case was serious, with a reserved prognosis. They could not assure whether the mother would survive a surgical intervention of such magnitude, nor if she would regain mobility. A terrible scenario, an abyss of uncertainty, opened before the family. The operation transpired in a veil of mystery and tension. Few truly knew what was happening inside that operating room, in the sanctuary of life and death. They only waited, with bated breath, for the news. When she finally emerged, after 5 hours of a highly complex intervention, which had tested the surgeon's skill and the body's resistance, she had to be immediately transferred to intensive care. In that ward of silence and machines, access was extremely restricted. Only the patient's brother and the other brother, also a doctor, could enter to see her. The young people of the family, the cousins, the rest of the relatives, were excluded, separated by the cold barrier of hospital protocol. Access was very limited, a forced solitude imposed by the gravity. Shortly after, the family would learn the brutal truth that had taken place during the intervention. Their mother had been clinically dead for several minutes. Her heart, damaged and fatigued, had given out, had stopped. She had crossed the threshold, even if for a brief and indefinite period. Resuscitation was a fierce battle against death, complex and exhausting. Miraculously, against all odds, they managed to bring her back. All of that, finally, was able to move forward. Her life, hanging by a thread, clung to existence. After several days in an intensive care ward, a space shared with other patients in equally serious conditions, where the fragility of life was felt in every breath and deaths were a sad daily reality, Fernanda's mother made a small advance. She was transferred to a private room, although still within the intensive care area. This change, though a relief, did not mean a relaxation of restrictions. Intensive care did not receive visitors, except for one authorized person, a specific family member. Due to both brothers being doctors, they were allowed access. The rest of the family remained outside, waiting with anguish. One of those afternoons, the mother, already conscious, though in pain and a little disoriented by the trauma and medications, was in a low mood. "No. How I am," she murmured, sadness and unease invading her spirit, her body battered and mind fatigued. Suddenly, the door opened silently, and a very old woman entered. She wore a simple cardigan, a modest skirt. Her attire was normal, unpretentious. She approached the bed, greeted her with a sweet smile, and told her, with a voice full of infinite tenderness, "My daughter, you have to eat. Come on, eat your little soup so you'll be strong. Go on, eat this little soup." The mother, weakened, had not been eating well, obviously. The old woman came even closer, helped her sit up, caressed her head with a soft hand, and repeated with a voice that instilled calm, "Look, you're going to get very well, but you have to eat this little soup." Before the kind presence and the unbreakable sweetness of that woman, the patient had no way to refuse. An immense peace invaded her, a tranquility that dispelled anguish and pain, enveloping her in an inexplicable warmth. The old woman stayed by her side a little longer, talking to her in a low voice, creating an atmosphere of serene intimacy. The private room, which had previously exhaled the tense air of illness, transformed into a space of pleasant tranquility. The experience of the previous ward, with its constant reminder of death, with very serious people dying next to or in front of them, was a terrible memory, a shadow that now dissipated. Here, with the entrance of this little woman, this old lady, everything changed. The air seemed fresher, the atmosphere lighter. The heaviness vanished, replaced by a feeling of well-being, so much so that, when the old lady said goodbye and turned to leave, the mother, distracted finishing the soup she had brought her, could not utter a thank you. So, without hesitation, she rang the nurse's bell. When the nurse entered, the mother, her voice still imbued with the calm the old woman had transmitted to her, told her, "Listen, don't be mean. Please, talk to the old woman who just came. I didn't even ask her name. Who is she?" The nurse, with an expression of perplexity, asked, "Old woman? What old woman?" "The one who just left," insisted the patient. "You came very quickly. You must have seen her. She must be somewhere in the corridors." A very old woman, with a cardigan, dressed like this and that. The nurse looked at her with a mixture of pity and professionalism, and told her, "Well, no, there's no one. It doesn't usually happen. Sometimes people in your condition come to want to see things, but no. The mother, with a lucidity that defied her state, replied, "Miss, for God's sake, we were talking. She even helped me with the soup." And, indeed, the soup plate was empty. Irrefutable testimony of the interaction. The nurse, with a firmness that admitted no reply, responded, No one can enter. No one can enter. This area is restricted access. There are no visitors, no people enter. No old ladies walking around here greeting. Your brother can come because he is the doctor, but nothing else. From that moment on, Fernanda's mother's recovery was astonishing. Her health advanced steadily. Of course, after several surgical interventions and chronic heart ailments, 100% recovery is an unattainable ideal. She would continue to have health problems, ailments typical of age and illness, but something that was going to kill her in that place, something that had dragged her to the brink of death, did not. She firmly believes that that woman, or that old woman, was not a relative, but an angel, and that caress on her head, that voice that instilled calm, protected her, and helped her get out alive. Today she is 80 years old. Don't lose sight of this detail. She is still alive, having turned 80, with some ailments, some problems, but she walks, she is well. And she will never forget the calm that this ethereal being transmitted to her, a presence that, in reality, was not physically there. On that solitary afternoon, in that hospital room, but transcended the barrier of the visible. Allow me to tell you another story. One from Argentina, with the capacity to test anyone's nerves, to chill the blood, and move to the deepest part of the soul. It is the story of a family of European origin, like many others who have put down roots in the vast Argentine land. The father was a heavy machinery mechanic, a man already advanced in years, but with a fondness for going here and there, working tirelessly, fixing gigantic and complex machines. This man lived in the same place where he had his machinery workshop, a vast and noisy space, where heavy parts, imposing engines, and tools of all kinds accumulated. He had some machines here, others there. Mainly heavy construction equipment. Solid steel bulldozers, motor graders that devour the terrain, vibratory compactors that make the earth tremble. When his relatives visited them, the father always warned them with unwavering seriousness that the children, under no circumstances, should approach the workshop area. There were heavy parts that could fall, sharp objects, latent dangers everywhere. It was an intrinsically dangerous place for childish curiosity. But that visit had become especially good. The atmosphere vibrated with the joy of reunions. Other relatives had arrived, the children had gathered, and the place filled with happy shouts, crystalline laughter, unrestrained running, and improvised games. Amidst this whirlwind of innocence and revelry, no one knew at what moment, in an instant of carelessness, the little ones managed to slip away from the safe area and ventured into the forbidden workshop area. Being there, between play and daring, the jump and the fall, a cruel destiny awaited. A heavy metal piece, a fragment of one of the gigantic machines, gave way and fell on top of one of the little ones. The impact was brutal, devastating. The little one, barely 4 years old, suffered a terrible blow to the head. His skull shattered, an open wound that bled profusely. Practically, one of his eyes, detached from its orbit, hung by a thread, a scene of horror capable of killing anyone from fright and shock. But, miraculously, he was still breathing. He was alive. When the ambulance, with its wailing sirens, arrived at the scene of the tragedy, the paramedics were impressed by the magnitude of the wound. With expert hands, but with a palpable expression of concern, they placed the child on a stretcher. At the moment of lifting him, a piece of his little face, a fragment of his fragile being, detached and fell onto the stretcher's fabric, a horrifying detail that accentuated the horror of the scene. Upon arrival at the hospital, the child's condition was critical. He was practically in a coma, unresponsive to any stimulus, his small body fighting to cling to life. When the doctors began to examine him, the prognosis was grim. They should immediately transfer him to a more complex hospital, with specialists capable of facing such devastation. And while the mother, Patricia Berries, listened to these words, her soul torn by anguish, suddenly she heard how the doctors, several of them around the child, began to murmur in alarm. One of them shouted, with an urgency that chilled the blood, "He's depressing! He's depressing! Let's go! He's depressing!" That phrase, in medical jargon, was a terrible verdict. The child was slipping away from them, his little life escaping through their fingers. The doctor, who was organizing everything, a man of action, ran to the mother, held her by the shoulder firmly, and told her, with a voice that tried to instill calm amidst the chaos, calm down, don't worry. Sans something is in this ambulance. Sans something, like Sans Martinez, Sans Rodriguez, Sans Fernandez. He's the nurse, he added, as if the mere mention of his name was a guarantee. Why were they telling her that? It was a question the mother, in that moment of desperation, couldn't even formulate. All she knew was that her child, her baby, was going to be transferred urgently. He had a double skull fracture, a deep injury that exposed the brain. His face was totally damaged, and he would need countless reconstructive surgeries. Most likely he wouldn't survive. In fact, it was very, very likely he wouldn't survive. The doctors from the city where they were had already called New Cane, the reference hospital, to speak with the specialists there, so they would wait for him, be attentive, that as soon as he arrived, the child should immediately enter the operating room, because he would not survive if he was not attended to immediately. Time was, literally, life. They put the little one in the ambulance, with the wailing of sirens piercing the air. Inside the emergency vehicle, the atmosphere, against all odds, seemed to change. Everything seemed strangely well. The nurse, the enigmatic Sans, with an unusual sweetness, caressed the child, touched him with a tenderness that transmitted an inexplicable calm. He smiled at the mother and told her, with a voice full of strange authority, in her state of shock and anguish, didn't want to hear empty promises. She just wanted to see her child smile. And, miraculously, as they approached New Cane, the impossible happened. The child was smiling. He was awake, conscious, responding to stimuli. Sitting on the stretcher as if nothing had happened. Looking at his mom and making some jokes, with a humor that defied the logic of his state. The nurse observed both of them with a serene smile. The mother was frozen, but not from cold or fear, but from joyful astonishment. When they arrived at the New Cane hospital, the stretcher was quickly lowered. The specialist doctors, the traumatologist, the neurologist, the surgeon, the pediatrician, the entire emergency team, arrived running, their faces reflecting a mixture of expectation and, as they saw the child, palpable disbelief, even distrust. What was happening? What was this scene about? A child, who supposedly came with 2 severe brain injuries, 2 skull fractures, with exposure and contact, and yet was conscious, laughing, joking. What kind of joke was this? When they reviewed the studies that had been done at the first hospital, the discrepancy was incomprehensible. The plates showed devastation. This child is not the one from the studies. It's absurd, murmured the doctors, their minds trained in medical logic, unable to process the contradiction. They immediately put him through a more advanced study, a tomography, a more complicated scanner that would reveal every detail. And the result was even more astonishing. There were no fractures. The child was fine. What on earth was happening? In the original X-ray, the injury was very serious, undeniable evidence of the catastrophe. But in the new tomography, there was no injury. Not one. But when they turned the images over and began to see the other cuts of the tomography, there was a scar. A scar on the head, inside the skull. But only 2 hours had passed since the accident. What force, what miracle, could have healed such wounds in so little time, leaving only a scar as proof of their existence? The child recovered perfectly, with a speed that astonished everyone. But, during his convalescence, he asked for grapes. Grapes, and more grapes, in a season when grapes were scarce. Sometime later, when his memory began to consolidate and his ability to express himself grew, he told them about the old man. He, When they were already at the hospital, as they arrived, there was an old man next to him, eating grapes. That's why he wanted grapes. And the old man, with a kind smile, told him, "Behave well, behave well." It is difficult to know with certainty which of all these figures was the angel, whether the nurse Sans or the mysterious old man with the grapes. But the child, who was condemned to death, whom the doctors had given up for lost, is no longer a child today. He has grown up and is in perfect health, without sequelae. What would you think of a story like that? For Patricia Berets, the mother of that little boy, the answer is an unbreakable certainty. An angel, without a doubt, had intervened. The divine promise, repeated over and over in the scriptures, resonated with a victorious echo. I will protect you. Do you want me to tell you one last story? One that speaks to us of the unbreakable family connection and the promise that we are not alone, even in the deepest darkness? Do you have time for one last journey into the heart of the inexplicable? Allow me to introduce you to Rosa, a woman whose life took an unexpected turn amidst adversity. Rosa lived in the bustling and sunny landscapes of Los Angeles, California, the city of dreams and stars. But, for some business reason, a job opportunity that promised a more prosperous and stable future for her and her family, she was offered a position in Virginia, on the east coast of the United States. With her heart divided between the promise of a better future and the separation from her children, she made the most difficult decision: to entrust her little ones to their grandmother in Los Angeles. The idea was to settle down, pave the way, and then bring them with her, creating a united home. What any mother would do, sacrifice for the well-being of her offspring. The problem, the crack in the plan, was the pandemic. A few days after her arrival in Virginia, the world, as we knew it, fell apart. The epidemic of an unknown virus erupted with unheard-of ferocity, spreading like wildfire across all continents. Suddenly, travel restrictions became effective. Flights were canceled, borders closed. An ancestral fear seized humanity, the terror of the invisible, of the contagious, of death lurking around every corner. Rosa, terrified and alone in a strange city, remained confined at home, watching helplessly as her children stayed with their grandmother on the other side of a country now divided by insurmountable barriers. And then, illness reached her. She doesn't know, to this day, if at some point she contracted COVID-19. If it was that virus or some other ailment, but what she did experience were very high fevers, so high that she felt her body burning from within, slowly consuming her. In addition to the fever, an immense anguish invaded her. She had trouble breathing. Every breath of air was a struggle. Her lungs felt oppressed, unable to fully expand. She felt like she was dying, an overwhelming sensation of choking and desperation. At times, her mind began to lose its reason. Delirium took hold of her. The boundaries between reality and hallucination blurred. She couldn't cope with the scorching heat of the fever, but at the same time, the cold of loneliness paralyzed her. There was no one to help her, no one to call for help. She didn't even dare to dial 911, the emergency number. The fear of contagion, of the hospital, of the solitude of an isolation room, immobilized her. She couldn't. She didn't know what to do, her body and mind on the verge of collapse. When, suddenly, in the midst of darkness and delirium, she felt a soft, warm hand touching her head, and a voice, deep and reassuring, whispered in her ear, calm down, my daughter. Breathe slowly, breathe slowly." When Rosa, with superhuman effort, managed to turn her head, she saw her grandfather. He was next to her, not as she had seen him last, fragile and old, but as she remembered him from her childhood. Big, strong, vigorous, as if he were alive again. His presence radiated a comforting familiarity, a connection with the past, with the security of childhood. And then, there, suddenly, Yaniel appeared. Her cousin, who had died very young, his jovial spirit now serene. Also, Emilia, her grandmother, whose kind face looked at her with infinite sweetness. Her mother, Rosa, namesake, was over here. Tina, a dear aunt, and Mario, another cousin who had passed away prematurely. They were all there, around her, calm, serene, but also looking so well, so full of peace. They were accompanying her in her darkest hour, in her fight for life. When she realized this celestial reunion, this presence of her deceased loved ones, an immense calm invaded her. She relaxed, the tension in her body yielded, her mind calmed. The fever, for a moment, seemed to recede. The grandfather continued caressing her head, his strong hand transmitting a protective energy, and she, with tears in her eyes and her voice barely audible, told him, "Please, I don't want to die, grandfather. I don't want to die." Her thoughts, obviously, on her children, on the life she was leaving behind. The grandfather, with an unbreakable sweetness, replied, "Calm down, my daughter. We are all here to take care of you." At which point she looked at all those present, at her deceased relatives, and all of them looked at him, in a clear illusion that they were in contact, that they were part of the same consciousness, of the same mission. Hallucinations, by their very nature, can make a person see figures, but those figures do not interact with each other, do not coordinate their actions. They are individual projections of the mind. Here, the interaction was palpable, real, collective, and she insisted, the urgency of her heart resonating in her voice. "I don't want to die." And the grandfather's voice, with the calm of eternity, replied, "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." And everything was fine. Rosa recovered, against all odds, from that devastating illness. Today, she tells us this story, a testimony to the unbreakable connection between the planes of existence and the promise of a protection that transcends death itself. Transcendent and spiritual muse. What would you think of these experiences, of these testimonies that defy logic and delve into the realm of the inexplicable? Returning to the biblical text, the beacon of our exploration. "Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to lead you to the place that I have prepared for you. Behave well in his presence and listen to his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not forgive your transgressions. For in him is my name. If you listen carefully to his voice and do what I say, your enemies will be my enemies and your adversaries my adversaries, because I am Jehovah your God." Perhaps, sometimes, our limited mind and our cultural imagination lead us to think that angels must have little wings, crowns, and harps, and it is probable that some do, in their celestial glory, in their purest manifestation. But today, through these moving and extraordinary stories, we have spoken of these cases in which that promise of "I will protect you" is fulfilled, a protection that manifests in the most unexpected forms, in the most familiar voices, in the most comforting presences, transcending the barriers of the physical and the visible. In a turn towards the celebration of life and joy, allow me to extend some very special greetings. Firstly, to Angie Mafla, who with great affection congratulates Michelle Reina Osorio, who resides in the vibrant city of Medellin. Michelle, at this moment, is celebrating her 15th birthday, a magical age, a threshold of new possibilities. In fact, tomorrow she will be turning 15. So, from here, with the anticipation and enthusiasm that the occasion deserves, we send her our most sincere congratulations. Happy 15th birthday, Michelle. May this new stage of your life be full of joy, discoveries, and achievements. It is a propitious moment for reflection, to rethink what you wish to do with the life unfolding before you, to choose a path with conviction, to forge a destiny with determination, to make things happen, to dare to change, and, with your own change, to positively influence the world around you. 15 years, a good time to dream big. Don't let it pass. It's the perfect moment for you to think about your aspirations and turn them into reality. Happy birthday, and may you have a happy 15th birthday that marks the beginning of an extraordinary life. And, of course, we also extend our congratulations to Gabriela Perez Martinez. She celebrates her birthday on December 21st, and we know that she always listens to us faithfully in the company of her husband. So we take this opportunity to send a warm hug to both of them, wishing Gabriela a happy birthday, a day full of joy and love, and a long year of happiness and success. May their union continue to strengthen with every step of the way. And for Jose Javier Heredia Corona, who tunes into us from the imposing city of Chicago, a special greeting. His wife, sometimes, prefers not to join us in listening because, as he tells us, the mystery scares her a little. Dear lady, don't be afraid. Just join us. Nothing happens, because we are very careful with what we say, with what we read, and with what we expose. Our goal is for you to be able to accompany us with total pleasure, with the certainty that the mystery we explore is always presented with respect and care. Believe us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the inexplicable.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support helps us keep creating more content like this. See you in the next episode.